Welcome everybody to this Ideas for Breakfast. I'm really excited about the topic today, and I have a lot of love and affection for these guests. Charity, Tricia, and I have worked together in the past, and I think that their ideas are going to be really helpful, kind of no matter what angle you're coming from. This is a topic I think we can all kind of put to good use. So Charity, do you want to kind of jump in and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Despi. I'm Charity Counts, and I always have to say that's my real name. No joke there. I kind of found or stumbled my way into the museum field when I was in art school at Ball State. I was drawn to the idea of working in teams. I was trying to figure out how I was going to do something creative with my life, but not necessarily, be an artist full time. And I love the idea of working collaboratively in teams, and museums are a place for me to do that. Now, I've been leading exhibit projects and organizing events, with museums in this industry, I should say, ever since. Currently, my work is primarily focused on professional development for museums through the Association of Midwest Museums. So, but I also like opportunities like this one where I get to share, my experience and knowledge with, others, hopefully to their benefit.
Cool. Thanks. Tricia?
Yeah, so Tricia O'Connor. I also found my way into the museum field kind of by accident. I was working in education and teaching middle school, and I found my way into the museum, and it was exactly where I wanted to be because I could use my skills of working with who my audience is and what can they learn and what can they do, and museums were a great place for me to kind of grow that. And so I've been in the museum field for probably 2 decades, working on exhibits for children, families, and lifelong learners. And gosh, a range of topics from Jewish cowboys to Hot Wheels to the American Civil War. So whatever it is, I dive in. And as part of my job, I love collaborating with teams to kind of harness those creative ideas and figure out how to create those engaging experiences. So I'm looking forward to sharing one of our favorite tools.
Cool. Awesome. I guess I should tell everybody who I am. I don't think this webinar is yet so famous that everybody just knows. Someday we'll be there. I'm Despi Ross. I lead marketing at Oldspeake. I have a variety of experience working in interactive technology and marketing kind of across nonprofits and agencies. If you're not familiar with Oldspeake, we are a web and app development studio, really design-centered and focused on creating really next-level experiences that are worthy of the human experience. So it's a good overlap, I think, today in the topic that we're talking about because, when we talk about creating amazing experiences, often the first step of that is some kind of brainstorming. And I have led some of the most, I think, painful brainstorming sessions like in the history of planet Earth. And, there's a lot of nuance and opportunity to make those better. In the preparation for this conversation, I kind of, with a little bit of low expectation, looked at the Wikipedia article about brainstorming, and it really delivered exactly what I thought it would. We're going to put a link to it in the notes, in the blog notes for this session, but it's really funny. Brainstorming was invented in 1953 or 1957 or 1963, depending on which actual Wikipedia article you read, which I feel like that could be a whole nother webinar session to talk about that issue. But it's been around for a long, long time. It, is something that I think we have never figured out a great process for how we can engage everybody in it. So when you think about engaging your creative teams, what we're going to talk about today is a way that you can do that more methodically and get better results, better engagement from everybody who's participating. So I'm excited to learn. I think that if you're a marketing team, if you're a creative team, you're doing web design, spatial design, like all of those things can really benefit from these ideas. So let's talk about what motivated you both to look for new approaches. I mean, certainly we've all had those weird, awkward silences in meetings, and you know what I mean? But like, what was your experience that led to you looking for a new, better way?
Despi, I just want to say I can relate to having led brainstorms that kind of fall flat. That does happen. I mean, sometimes it's just nobody's in the mood for it, you know? But I would say as a project manager, which has been my primary role for 15, 18, however many years I've been doing this, I forget now. And I've always run into situations with teams, no matter what we were working on, where the project stalled. And everyone's like, we just can't go any further. We don't know what to do next. We don't have a solution. Maybe they're arguing about what the solution is and they can't move past that. And sometimes it's just better to like set everything down and bring everybody into the room and brainstorm and work through it. And so I also feel really passionately about the importance of a creative, team manager's role in keeping spirits high, because creative people can very easily, fall into this low morale when things go that path every time, right? Like it's a stumbling block for many, but it definitely pulls down the creative, team sort of flow. And I don't want that. So as a project manager, I'm always looking for new ways to try to get ideas out on paper or wherever it can be.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm a what if kind of thinker, and so sometimes I'll have an idea, and it's just the never-ending comments like, "We can't do this, we can't afford that, it's not possible." And so when I found out about this tool we're going to share at a science conference, I was like, "Oh, this could be a great way for us to kind of move past," because you're developing solutions in 3D that kind of helps you think more concretely about ideas that are actionable, and everybody's at the table, so everybody has a voice.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think when I've experienced brainstorms gone awry, it's because there's not expectations set in the beginning that everybody does have a voice, or that you're really, really interested in what everybody has to say, kind of without judgment. I feel like you guys will kind of get into that a little bit too. But it's hard. And I think for some people, it's easier to share their kind of off the top of their head ideas than others, which I think is one of the things about this R.I.G process that I think is so helpful, is the way that it fosters that team sort of aspect, take some of the pressure off the individual,
Yeah.
So tell us about it. We've kind of been, referring to it, but tell us what R.I.G is all about. Like, why we do it.
I'm gonna throw a couple photos up on screen here for us, just so you can kind of see what a R.I.G kind of looks like.
Yeah. So basically, with the rapid idea generation, you're working in small teams to design, build quick solutions using materials. And so you can see on the left, this is a small team from the Children's Museum, and they're just using some materials that we had that they could use to present their ideas, to develop their idea and then present it to the team. And then on the right, we worked with, we presented this idea at a conference, and we probably had, 40 people, Charity, do this.
Only. It was a lot.
But it was really fun. And so we're going to kind of talk through why you would use a R.I.G and then tell you how to do that. And so one of the reasons for why you want to do a R.I.G is you need some outside the box ideas. And so it really brings together members of the team, but also beyond. And we'll talk about that. You really want to look beyond just your project team.
Another reason is that you need solutions right now. I mentioned that stall point. I think when teams reach that point, sometimes it's better just to get them in the room. An activity like this only lasts like 20 to 30 minutes. There's no time to overthink it. It's really just put something out there, do it together, and lots of fun.
And it's really fun. You kind of get out of your head and into a zone, and it's also that time element. When somebody says there's 5 minutes left, you're like, oh, okay, we got to figure this out so we can present our idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other reason to use a rig is that it can produce some unique results. I think, Tricia and I have both experienced where a rig, presented a variety of different options, paths for the team, all that seemed like it would work. But you also have all the right people in the room, plus others who can bring new ideas so that those who got stuck can get unstuck. And so it just really produces some things you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. And so we've talked a lot about who you have. And so usually you want to gather. I like no less than 9 people so that you can break into teams of about 3 to 4 people. So they're working in small groups. And I like to get a good mix of roles. You might have your experts, your educators, designers, and then what I call wild cards. These might be people on your front line, might be the secretary or the information coordinator in your office. They have a unique perspective, and they also often have ideas from outside. And so that's a good mix. And then with the teams, you want to make sure the teams have a good mix of roles. So, one designer, one researcher, one educator, mix that up. And then also just the loose parts. So cardboard, tape, markers, whatever you have that you can use to construct ideas.
The other 2 sort of things to know about setting this up and running a rig is that you want to have enough time to try to get 2 rounds of rig in, because when you do the first round of rapid idea generation, everyone gets a chance to present it. And then if you get to go through another round with those ideas, but kind of mix things up, you can refine that a little bit more, and that helps you get closer to a solution, an actionable solution. Also, I cannot emphasize enough, Despi kind of referenced this earlier, to the importance of candor, making it safe for people to be creative and to speak up and to have a voice at the table in this, I think is really key. So set it up at the beginning to, that everyone here has got great ideas. We may not be able to use all of them, but please, speak up.
Yeah, and on that too, so sometimes we'll make sure that we have the people who are building the project also on the teams, because they're the ones who usually have to take the idea and make it work. And so having them at the table helps them have a voice in creating that solution. But the other thing I would say in making it safe is, also for the project team to say, we're going to take these ideas then back to the team. The team is going to figure it out. So the team also doesn't have to feel like if someone comes up with a solution that they aren't comfortable with, the team has the choice to decide how to use those ideas.
That's a good point. I think that often being a technologist, just in general, I feel like often you're delivered fully formed ideas for implementation, and there's so much missed opportunity when the people who are building a thing aren't part of the ideation process, because they can share so much insight about things that you don't know are possible, So it's kind of a big miss, and something that we run into certainly sometimes, and try to kind of remedy that with process or whatever. But I like that this rig process kind of has that built in.
Yeah, it's about everyone brings value to the conversation, and I think I imagine that situations that you're talking about, Despi, come from certain departments or team members feeling like, if you bring the production people in, they're going to tell you no. But actually what Tricia and I witnessed is that they're there too, like, right, excited to brainstorm. They're creative people too. And so you got to give them credit for that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about the definition of creative, like who's a creative, and you know, like who gets to count in that way. And there has become such a narrow definition in some of our teams, and departments that are labeled creative, you know, there's this expectation that the process is linear, like step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this, and there's all these handoffs that happen along the way. But that is so the way we've always done it, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's no reason to be beholden to that other than that's the way we've always done it.
That's why I like to bring in those wild card people, because they're really seeing things from a unique perspective, and sometimes they'll have an idea that nobody has thought of. And people on your front lines who are seeing how people are using what you're doing really have a unique perspective.
Yeah, that's really true.
And so one other really important part of the rig, so you've done all that work, you've gathered your people, but you want to really clarify your goals and constraints. And so I usually like to form like a how might we make a fun hands-on interactive that talks about still life without using any paint, or so how could you do it with objects to teach still life to audiences without using paint? And so and also, what are some design constraints? Who's the audience? Does it need to be under $500? Does it need to be use materials that we can easily maintain? So what are some of those design constraints? And also, like, if we're at a point where we're stuck, like Charity mentioned earlier, like, where have we gotten stuck and what have we tried? Maybe we've tried something, or maybe there's something we really want to do, but we haven't figured it out yet.
Do you think that constraint setting could also exclude things that you don't want to focus on in the rig? Or do you feel like that's limiting? Do you want me to give an example? Like, I was thinking about how in a marketing context, I think it'd be really helpful to, you know, lead one of these sessions to come up with a campaign idea, you know, and it would be helpful to give constraints like, we're not gonna do paid ads on Google in this campaign. Like, that's not even on the table because we know we'll do that anyway, you know, or some like thing that you don't want to encourage everybody to come up with like the same ideas, you know, that we always implement. Can we kind of eliminate some of that stuff so we get truly creative about how we might do field marketing, or, you know, how we might create virtual events or something like that, that give direction?
Well, I think you don't want it. This isn't a never-ending process, right? You want people to come to some solution, and I think you're right. Constraints are more of a guide, right? They're about saying, I want you to focus on these pieces. These things are said. I was thinking before this, presentation today that, one issue that Tricia and I ran into when we presented at a conference was that we had to come with kind of a full, like a developed idea and say, give them a little bit of background so that they could do it because it was a demonstration. Right. And in that situation, there are people in the room who wanted to pick apart whatever we said was our big idea for the project or the message we're trying to deliver. And we're like, no, we're not changing that today. Today we're focused on how we're going to do this thing. And so I think you can, if you don't have things in your mind, that you don't want to change, then it's hard to get them to focus.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can't be open to things that come up that you might maybe didn't think of before that affect that, but you don't want them to focus on that.
Yeah.
Again, it's only 20 minutes maybe for one round, right? And if they spend all their time talking about something that you don't want them to talk about, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the other constraint that we use a lot for museums, if it's an interactive, is like, it needs to be fun to do, but also fun to reset. So everything has to be reset for the next person. And the great interactive is one that is fun to build and fun to take apart so that you get both ways. So that would be a constraint I might add.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So what is different about the types of conversations that happen during a rig versus the kind of open-ended questions we might expect in a brainstorm session?
That's a good question. I feel like because I feel like my experience with these is that the small teams tend to just kind of dive right into just they start with throwing out ideas. Maybe someone's kind of sketching out, the first thing that came to my mind was this, and then everybody's kind of talks about it from there, and until they get to the point of creating something together, which I think is maybe a little bit different than in a brainstorm where you just start to just put things on a board, because they immediately are putting something into action. The conversation flows a little bit differently.
Right.
What about you, Tricia?
I just think too that you get like I just did one last week, and I was expecting the answers to be kind of related to something, but I got a really unique perspective on a way that we could use videos, and I wasn't even talking about videos, but it really made me think differently, and each group had a little bit different thing that I could kind of pull from all of them. And that's a lot of times what happens in the second round is people will listen to what they heard other people say, and then they'll refine it.
I'll also go back to that conversation about having all the right people at the table, involving production. And I think the conversations you'll have in this kind of a brainstorm versus a typical one is that you've got people who are affected by every point in the development and production of a thing in the room. And so you'll have the conversation go a little bit differently, where you maybe expect that someone's going to put the brakes on and say, that's not possible. But instead they're saying, oh, wait, no, but we can build it this way. Because they feel that, the pressure of time to generate something, everybody wants to produce, and it's fun to produce something. So they're going to figure out how to do it.
Can you talk about, and maybe you will, and I realize I've kind of interrupted the flow a little bit of our outline, so sorry, I think can you talk a little bit about the hands-on nature of the rig and why that's important?
Well, because you're creating something, we're usually working with museums, but you're creating something that's going to be on the floor for people to use or see. We've done it with collections cases. And as Charity said, instead of just ideas, like a brainstorm is usually, it's all these ideas. It's like, okay, how's this going to work in real life? Like, what is it? And what are people going to see? What are people going to do? So what are those tangible parts of your solution?
Yeah. And I think the interactivity piece of that, the building something, helps with the flow there. I think it's just a key part of it. It also what separates it from typical brainstorming.
Yeah. I think in the digital realm, as we think about people trying to do this with web projects or apps or marketing campaigns, I think there's so much opportunity to take it to that tangible level in the same way, by either providing people with kind of little paper templates of different deliverables, like letting them build web pages, letting them sketch them. I think there's a really one-to-one translation of that hands-on, from creating something that's going to be three-dimensional in the physical world to creating something digital, because I think it's rare, actually. I know there are teams that do this, but in general, when we're talking about a marketing team that is interacting with an agency or even their own in-house creative/technology team to build something, it's very rare for a group of people to get together and actually sketch out ideas in that way, or talk about what happens if these components become interchangeable, or, it's just like we are so stuck in our step-by-step kind of process, and it's like somebody else's job to think of the ideas and somebody else's job to implement those ideas. And I'm just really interested in how a rig can help us quickly kind of workshop technology ideas,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and one thing I'll point out, because, you know, as I thought about this with just, you know, how you might use this in marketing or the digital world, I keep thinking about how I always wanted to be able to help marketing with building campaigns, because and specifically thinking about how we use the assets we have available in, you know, advertising like billboards and other paid outlets, right? We weren't ever engaged in that process, but boy, if you could bring that, say, from a museum team, the curator and the designer and the, you know, the exhibit developer and the marketing, you know, graphic designer, whomever, into the same room, and everybody's collaging using pieces from a magazine or cutouts of objects from the, you know, images of objects from the exhibition list, and all of a sudden you're like, you know, the curator may make choices or make suggestions because they see some value in something that perhaps the marketer's not quite picked up on, right? And then they have that conversation in a different way as they collage a billboard, you know. And I think that there are ways to do it that are fun, that don't involve, like, you know, pipe cleaners. I know the pictures that we do have a lot of materials that you as, you know, marketers or digital media folks might be thinking, I don't know how I'm going to use that. But there are other materials you can use to layer up and create something together that's still fun, you know?
Yeah.
Totally. Anything else about the RIG process that we haven't yet talked about that you want to make sure you get in before we move on to kind of more?
I mean, we gave a, you know, pretty good overview, I'd say. You know, we can always share more resources later.
Cool. If anybody has questions, please throw them in the chat. We're happy to answer them. Okay, so we've been talking a little bit about how marketers could use this method with their teams. I think also agency creative teams, kind of, there's a lot of overlap in those two groups. I think that just some ideas, you know, for what we've been talking about, you know, instead of kind of 3D in the real world components, like, you know, how do you see marketers using rapid idea generation for their work?
I don't know, designing swag. You know, I think that's an option. I've talked about, you know, trying to create a plan for billboard advertising, but you could think about storyboarding a TV spot in the same way. There are a lot of different uses. I think anything that you can imagine people kind of just getting creative making as a concept, right? They're making concepts, and so that the team gets to use later. And
when I think, you know, I've done this a lot with computer digital interactives, is testing them on paper. It's the same thing. Like, where are things going to appear? I think you already mentioned it, Despi, but like, how could what's the screen going to look like? How could things appear? What's going to drop down? I think there's a way to just layer that process.
I'm also thinking, you know, more in line with the work we've done, trade show displays and store displays, photo ops. There might be some other things like that you're thinking about as a company that you want to be able to do as part of your overall marketing effort.
Yeah, I think also kind of thinking about virtual events. I don't think they're going to go away when COVID does, you know. I think people are trying to figure out, like, what, you know, because people are realizing, ooh, we can do some of this stuff with much less financial investment and still engage the people that we need to engage. And so I don't feel like we've even scratched the surface of how to make virtual events interesting. And there's so much, I feel like, there for us to explore.
Yeah.
So speaking of virtually, how can people do this remote when everybody's working from home and you can't sit in a room and scoot paper across the table?
Well, we figured it out. Early on in the quarantine, Charity and I were talking about, you know, we have all these museum professionals who are working from home and kind of maybe struggling with how do we even use online technology and keep our teams going. And so I said, what if we hold the world's, we think, first ever virtual rapid idea generation?
Right. when Tricia said it, I was like, that could work. And of course, we, you know, when we tested it out, we were trying to see how Zoom breakout rooms would work for it. So that's the tool we used. We you know, hosted a team that Tricia was working with on a project from the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. And we, invited their project manager to, share a couple of things that they maybe were stuck on that we could try to hash out in a rig. And so we knew who was coming in advance. We decided who was going to be in each team in advance, so that when we split them up into breakout rooms in Zoom, we assigned them to where we wanted them to be, so that there was a good mix of people in each space. And then we gave them, suggestions for supplies to have ready, at home, wherever they were working from, that they could use as a part of the rig. And then, at the beginning of it, we explained how it was going to work, that we were going to split them up, and here's what your challenge is. We posed the question of the constraints, as Tricia was saying, just like you would in a normal rig, set them to their rooms, and then where they worked. Now, when you're hosting in Zoom, you can kind of pop in as the host to check and see how things are going. So I think we took turns kind of doing that, checking in on the teams. One thing that we suggested that they do was assign roles in those rooms. So, you're not at the same table physically, so to work on something together in that way is a little different. So we knew that they were going to have to kind of pre-select someone to share their idea in the end, and also probably someone who was going to need to build it or create it. Even if they were going to all be sketching and talking about things from their end, they might, have back and forth. There had to be one finished item at the end. So they had to choose somebody to do that. And they got to do that on their own. We didn't choose that for them. So in some cases, it was a graphic designer that built something, or it was a 3D designer who sketched something. It was kind of a mix of results. But they came up with some fun ideas, and I think they actually still walked away with, oh, we need to do this. Like,
Yeah.
we've got an idea now. So it worked.
Yeah. And I do think, especially with Zoom team meetings, like breaking it down into like 3 people instead of 12 or 15, really, that really lends itself well.
And I would say too that things take a little bit longer, I feel like, virtually than they do in person. So just add a little bit of extra time into the rounds to make that work, because there's just the transition of moving from one space to the other virtually takes time, some other things too. So,
but also just like, it's the same kind of concept too, like letting people know when they've got like 3 or 4 minutes left, you got to wrap up.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's fun. It worked.
I feel like there's a big opportunity for employee engagement too with virtual rigs, because, as the team lead, you could send everybody fun materials in the mail. To prepare, and that's an opportunity to do something fun for your team that, I don't know, in the time where everybody's kind of distributed, could be fun.
Yeah, I love that idea.
That's great.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest sticking point that you've encountered using rigs, and how do you kind of get unstuck?
Well, I'm just going to share a story. So we were creating an exhibit about the terracotta warriors for kids and families, and it was about kind of kids taking on the role of an archaeologist. And at the terracotta warrior site, archaeologists pieced those sculptures back together from, thousands of pieces. And I wanted families to have just a small bit of that, like how could they piece together sculptures from a mix of pieces. And that's what I kept hearing, like, we can't do sculptures in the round, we could probably do something and they could piece them on the wall like a puzzle, but I wasn't ready to give up on my idea. And so we did this rapid idea generation, and I had a production guy in each group and designers, just that mix. And we came up with a solution, and they're still at the museum. There's 3 different little sculptures that you can piece together, just like they do at the site, but much simpler.
So what about that process do you think helped everybody get unstuck? Is it having the constraint, like you have to solve this problem and you've got 20 minutes to do it? Or is there something else about it?
I just think it's having the right people at the table, and each group came up, and not every group came up with a solution that was sculptures in the round, and that was okay too. That was, you know, what I was hoping for, but and it was a production guy who came up with a way to, using the materials we had, he figured out a way that you could have like a key in each piece that would slot it back together and would work. And so I don't know, Charity, do you have any thoughts on?
Well, I just would add too that I feel like in the Terracotta Warriors discussions, those rigs, we also had people who weren't necessarily working on the specific assignment in the room, you know, other fabricators, other designers. And I think that, again, the reason why you bring extras in is because they're not staring at this every day. So that to them, maybe it is possible. And so they're going to be looking at it differently. Everybody enjoys the opportunity to flex their muscles creatively in that way. So I think it just helped to have other people in the room too, to get unstuck.
Yeah, I like to use Slack. I mean, this is a little different, but I like to use Slack sometimes for like a random idea generation from the team. Yeah. And I think it's so helpful to ask for, like, if I'm trying to come up with a name for something, or you know, just even deciding between a few things, I'm always interested in what the entire team has to say. And there's no way to tell where the best idea will come from.
Right.
You know? I feel like some of the best marketing ideas I've ever gotten have been from engineers, because they're irreverent and typically, and they, like Charity's saying, like, they just don't have the connection to like living with this stuff in their face all the time. I mean, they have different stuff in their face all the time, but you know, it's just like a layer of separation can be so helpful in coming up with fresh ideas. Okay, so Dan's asked if you could give a start to finish, step by step of what happens in a rig. Like what, so if you were giving somebody like a 5-step rig program, what would that be?
So what happens in the rig, so there's prep that goes on before. Like I said, like I would formulate my teams. I'm making sure when I invite people, I've got that mix, and I would kind of have my teams in place. But there's always people who don't show up and you have to adjust the team. But just making sure you've done that prep work. But at the rig, so basically most of the time is going to be spent creating the solution. And so I would present the design constraints, you know, what's the goal, what's the constraint. I'd tell them about the time frame. You know, you're going to be in your teams for about 20, 25 minutes. You're going to come up with a solution to present to the team. And then I just see if there's any questions, and then send them into their teams. And while they're in their teams, I would walk around and just pop into different teams, just like we did in the virtual rig, to see if anybody has questions, if there's anything I can add to the discussion. And then I'm usually like the ringleader, like, hey, we got 5 minutes, you should be wrapping up your rapid idea generation. And then each team presents their idea. So they usually like 5 to 10 minutes for people to present their ideas. And then ideally what I do is mix up those teams. So I don't want the same team together again. I want to mix up those teams and have them go at the same idea again. So they've heard those ideas, and then they can use those to come up with more refined ideas.
Cool.
I tried to capture those 5 things really succinctly in the chat too.
So
hopefully that helps you out there.
Yeah, you would add?
No, I think that's pretty much it. You know, you as the leader of the rig are going to make sure you have all the supplies and everything ready to go. Yeah. There is prep time. Don't ignore the prep time. Like, you got to make sure you're ready for this. You've thought through what you want them to work on and focus on and what they're going to use to get there. But then it's fun from there.
Mm-hmm. And so the team is really where that hands-on ideation comes in. Everybody presents something physical. whether it's a makeup or a built thing.
Yeah. And, Tricia and I laugh still to this day about like the presentations that they do. They're so proud of the things they've created. I have been known to, even when I present whatever solution I helped to come up with, we played music. We've had a whole like reveal before. I think people enjoy doing it. It's fun.
It is fun.
It's important. It stays fun. Yeah.
Cool. Very last question, unless there are questions from the group. How can people learn to do this better? If they want to invest in learning, what are the resources?
Yeah, well, I don't know if Tricia has any specific resources to point out. I just want to mention that, she and I actually we've got a whole workshop series that we've created. We've done a few of our workshops virtually in the past year and a half. Even pre-COVID, it was, just, doing webinars for different groups around the country. And we are happy to train your team on how to do that, or your project managers or project leads. We're also happy to come in and help to lead a rig for you for the first time if you want somebody to do it from externally and then learn that way. But we have those workshops. So I just want to put that out there that we're happy to help you get that started. Sometimes introducing that idea can be confusing to people, like, what is this? Mm-hmm. So that's one option. I don't know, Tricia, if there are particular places you would suggest people look, and I suppose we can always include links to other sources, Despi, in the blog posts that you create too.
Yeah, I'll have to see. I mean, as I mentioned, I learned about it at a science conference years ago, and I'm sure there's something online about it, but I've just always used what we have.
Yeah.
I think that there's a really great benefit to an outside perspective sometimes in introducing new things like this. So I think it's cool that you guys are going into organizations and offering that, because sometimes there's a psychological thing that happens where, new ideas coming from new people stick better, for better or worse, right?
Well, yeah, and I think just between the two of us, and you too, Despi, but there are lots of different places where teams can get stuck, and there's different tools you can use to help teams get unstuck. So,
yeah. So if somebody wants to reach you, how best should they do that?
Well, we can actually, if you want, we do have a page set up on my website. I'll post it in the chat here, xgexhibits.com. that lists our workshops. There's also a contact form on that. People can always, if they're interested in connecting with us, they can always submit a request through the contact form. That comes to me, but Tricia and I would collaborate on, the solution for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being our guests today.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody who joined us for taking time out to learn about this new method. If you try a rig, we'd love to hear about it and hear the awesome ideas that you come up with. I think Oldspeake should definitely do this for the Oldspeake folks that are in the participant group. So awesome. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll hope to see you next month at our next
Thanks, Despi.
Thanks, Despi. Thanks, everyone.